The raven came for her a little after 10, and Isabel Hart made the mistake of following it. It landed on the crooked gate at the bottom of her great-aunt's garden with a clap of black wings, cocked its head at her, and looked. There was no other word for it, expectant. Beyond the gate the ground fell away into Ravenscar Wood, the wood the whole of Witchcombe crossed themselves against, the wood that belonged to the cursed Duke of Ravenscar, and to no sensible soul besides. Isabel knew all the stories. She set down her trowel anyway. "You are not a real raven," she told it. "You are somebody's idea of an omen, and I have no time for you." The bird turned its head the other way and made a low, rattling sound in its throat, a sound like a small door opening. Then it dropped from the gatepost, glided 10 yards into the green shade of the trees, and settled again on a low branch. Waiting, the morning smelled of warm nettles and cut grass, and the faint sourness of the river beyond the elms. July had come down over the valley like a held breath. Isabel had spent it, as she spent most of her days now, on her knees among the foxgloves with a stub of pencil and a half-filled sketchbook, drawing the throats of flowers, because it was the one thing that had followed her out of her old life into this reduced one and cost nobody anything. Ink under her nails, a smudge of graphite on the side of her hand, a curl of dark hair stuck to her damp neck that she pushed back with her wrist. Isabel, her great-aunt's voice carried from the cottage door, dry as a page. "You are talking to birds again. It is the first sign, you know." "The first sign of what, Aunt Prudence?" "Of a woman who has run out of people worth talking to." Prudence Fenwick came down the path with her stick and her enormous straw bonnet, 70 if she was a day, and settled herself on the bench by the sweet peas the way a cat settles, as though the whole world had been arranged for her convenience. "What does it want?" "I have no notion. It has been here every morning this week." Isabel watched the raven turn its bright eye on her aunt, and then, deliberately, back to her. "It wants me to follow it. Then it is a very stupid bird, or a very clever one, and either way you will do no such thing." Prudence tapped her stick once on the flagstone. "That is his wood, girl. Past the grey stones it is all his, and you know what they say about what happens to those who go in." "I know what they say. I do not believe a syllable of it. Belief has nothing to do with it. Reputation has everything to do with it, which you of all people ought to have learned by now." The old woman's mouth folded. It was as near as she ever came to speaking of the thing that had brought Isabel here. The failed engagement, the whispers, the swift and total closing of doors that had turned a woman of 26 from a guest in good houses into a burden shipped off to a great aunt at the edge of the world. A young woman seen coming out of the Duke of Ravenscar's trees does not come out the same as she went in. That is the whole of the curse, whatever else the fools in the village have added to it. The raven cawed. It was an impatient sound. "What did he do?" Isabel asked. She had asked before. She always asked, and Prudence always answered a little differently, which was how she knew nobody truly knew. The Duke. To be cursed. Prudence looked into the green dark under the trees for a long moment. A wood pigeon called somewhere, and was answered. 5 summers ago there was a fire at the hall, she said. The old Duke was in it. His son came out of it, and the county decided the son should not have. That is all. That is enough. A man who lives, and is not forgiven for living, learns to keep to his own trees. She reached out, and with surprising gentleness, tucked the loose curl behind Isabel's ear. "Which is why you will fetch me my thread from the parlour, and think no more of ravens." "Yes, Aunt. You are lying to me. You have the exact face your mother had before she did something regrettable and charming." Isabel laughed, and kissed the papery cheek, and went in for the thread. But she went in by the front, and she came out by the garden, and the raven was still there. The gate did not so much as creak when she opened it. Afterwards she would try to account for it, and fail. It was not that she believed the bird, it was that the wood was cool, and the morning was hot, and she had drawn every flower in her aunt's garden twice over, and somewhere under her breastbone was an ache she had been carrying so long she had stopped calling it by its name. The ache of being a person nobody was waiting for. The raven wanted her to come. It was the first thing in 3 months that had wanted her at all. So she caught up her sketchbook and her pencil, and her wide summer bonnet, and she stepped past the grey boundary stones with their coats of yellow lichen, and she followed a black raven into the forest. Exactly as the whole of Witchcombe would have told her not to. The trees closed over her head like water closing over a stone. It was another country in there. The heat fell away at once, and the light came down in coins through the canopy, shifting in green gold, so that the floor of the wood seemed to breathe. Fern uncurled to her knees, wet against her stockings. The air was thick, with the smell of leaf mold and wild garlic gone over, and something sweeter underneath, honeysuckle running riot up the old oaks. Her feet made no sound on the deep moss. Above her the raven flowed from branch to branch, never hurrying, never quite letting her lose it, a scrap of darkness stitched through all that green. "Where are you taking me?" she asked it once, and her voice came out hushed. The way one speaks in a church one does not attend. The bird did not answer, but it dropped lower, and she saw that it was leading her along a path. A true path, old and half swallowed, edged with the tumbled stones of a wall that had once meant something. She had thought the wood was wilderness. It was not. It was a garden gone feral, and the deeper she went the plainer it became. A stone urn drowned in ivy, a sundial with its face worn blank, an avenue of limes so overgrown their branches had knitted into a single roof. Somebody had loved this place once. Somebody had planted it in straight and hopeful lines, and then the world had gone wrong, and the green had come in and taken it back. She stopped drawing breath to draw the sundial instead. She could not help it. The pencil moved almost of its own accord, the worn face, the ivy's grip, the way the light lay across the ruined numerals. This was the thing she had come out of her old life still able to do, and she did it now with her lip caught between her teeth and the whole silent wood leaning in to watch, which was why she did not hear him until he spoke. "Turn back the way you came." The pencil skipped clean off the page. Isabel spun, one hand flying to her throat, and the sketchbook tumbled into the ferns. A man stood at the edge of the ruined avenue, not 10 feet from her, and how a man so large had come so close so quietly, she could not begin to understand. He was young, younger than she had braced for, near her own age, but there was nothing soft in him. He stood the way a door stands in a wall. His shoulders were broad enough to fill the gap between 2 limes. His shirt, rough and open at the throat, was dark with the sweat of real work, and his forearms, where the sleeves were shoved back, were corded and brown and streaked with earth. A billhook hung from one big hand, dark hair, too long, pushed back from a face that would have stopped conversation in any drawing room in England, a hard, beautiful face, all straight bones and shadow, with a pale seam of an old scar riding up through one dark brow. His eyes were the grey of the sky before weather. They were not friendly eyes. "I said turn back," he told her. His voice was low, and even and entirely certain. A voice used to being obeyed by whatever it addressed. Dogs, trees, weather. This is not a place for wandering. Isabel's heart was going like a caught bird's, but she had spent 3 months being looked at as though she were a stain on somebody's floor, and she had discovered, to her own surprise, that it had burned the fear out of a great many things. "You keep a raven," she said. That was not what he had expected. She saw it land. Something flickered behind the grey eyes and was gone. "I keep nothing," he said. "Least of all birds. Go home, madam, before you are missed." He came for me. She bent, never taking her eyes from him, and gathered her fallen sketchbook out of the ferns. "Every morning this week. And this morning he led me here, straight down that path as if he had drawn me a map. That is not the behavior of a bird that belongs to no one." As she straightened, the raven himself dropped out of the limes and landed on the worn sundial between them, folding his wings with an air of enormous satisfaction, plainly delighted with what he had arranged. Isabel looked at the bird. She looked at the man. There, he knows you perfectly well. For one heartbeat, she would swear to it later. The corner of the man's hard mouth moved, as though something in him wanted to answer, and had been forbidden the exercise so long, it had forgotten how. Then the sky put its thumb over the sun. It came the way summer storms come in that country, all at once and from nowhere, a sudden cold shove of wind that turned every leaf silver and sent the raven up in a startled clatter, and behind it, rolling down the valley, a low bronze mutter of thunder. The green-gold light drained out of the wood and left it grey. The first drops came fat and warm and far apart, ticking on the leaves overhead, and then the sky simply opened. Wonderful, Isabel said, to no one. You cannot go back over the stones in this. The man was already moving, and moving toward her, and she had a confused half-second of every warning her aunt had ever given her, before she understood that he was not menacing her at all. He had shrugged out of his rough coat, and was holding it up like a roof. The path floods. There is a bank a quarter-mile on that will take a woman off her feet in half a minute. This way. Now, if you please. The if you please was so incongruous, so absurdly, stiffly correct in the middle of a downpour with a billhook in his fist, that she nearly laughed. She did not. She caught up her skirts and ran with him, his coat streaming rain over both their heads, down the old lime avenue, while the wood roared and dripped, and the moss turned to a slick brown soup beneath them. And it was the moss that undid her. Her half-boot skated on a buried root. Her ankle turned under her with a bright, sickening wrench, and she went down hard against the fallen stones of the old wall, the breath knocked clean out of her, one hand still absurdly gripping the sketchbook to her chest. Do not stand on it. He was down on one knee beside her in the mud before she had finished falling, and his hands, for all their size, for all the earth ground into them, were careful as he set them either side of her boot. Be still, let me see. The rain sheeted off his dark hair, ran down the seam of that old scar, dripped from his jaw. This close she could smell him under the storm, sweat and crushed green and warm wet wool. It is not broken, he said after a moment, in the flat certain voice, and she believed him the way one believes a physician. Turned. Badly. You will not walk on it tonight. I have to walk on it tonight. My aunt, a fresh bar of thunder rolled directly overhead and swallowed the rest. When it had passed, the whole wood was a grey blur of falling water, and the light was already failing, and Larkspur Cottage and its grey stones and its dry, waiting aunt were suddenly very far away on the other side of a great deal of drowning wood. The man looked at her ankle. He looked at the ruined sky. Something moved in his face that she could not read. Not annoyance. Quite. Something nearer to dread. There is a house, he said at last, and the words seemed to cost him. Close, dry. You can shelter until the water goes down, and I will get word to your people that you are safe. He said safe as if it were a foreign word he had learned, but never had cause to use. It is not far. Whose house? He did not answer that. He gathered her up out of the mud instead, simply, without asking, one arm under her knees and one at her back, and she had a startled impression of enormous contained strength, of being lifted as though she weighed no more than the sketchbook, and he carried her down through the roaring green, with the rain running off both of them, and the raven wheeling black above the trees, and her arms, because there was nothing else to hold, went round his neck. She could feel his heart. It was going as fast as her own. You needn't look so grim about it, she managed, jolted against his chest. I am told I am tolerable company, when I have not just fallen into a wall. You should not have come into this wood. So everyone keeps saying, and yet here I am, being rescued by a man who talks like a duke and dresses like his own gardener, which is a great deal more interesting than anything that has happened to me since March. She felt, rather than heard, the sharp breath he took at the word duke and filed it away. You may as well tell me your name. I can hardly go on calling you sir the whole way to a house you will not name. For a long stretch there was only the rain, and his boots sucking through the mud, and the wet warmth of him. It is not a house you will thank me for, he said. The trees thinned, the ground rose, and then the wood let them out onto the edge of a great overgrown lawn, and Isabel Hart lifted her head from the stranger's shoulder and saw, rearing up grey and enormous against the streaming sky, its long windows dark, and its whole west wing a blackened ruin of open stone and empty arches, where fire had once walked through it, the house that the whole of Witchcombe crossed themselves against. Ravenscar Hall. She went very still in his arms. Above the great scorched doorway, cut into the weathered stone and softened by 200 years of rain, a bird spread its wings. A raven, carved, its beak open in the same silent, knowing cry as the one that had led her down through the trees. Her own raven landed on the ruined parapet above the burnt wing and shook the water from its feathers and looked down at the two of them, entirely at home. "You are him," Isabel said. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, small under all that rain. She tipped her head back to look up at the hard, beautiful, dread-filled face so close above hers, at the scar and the grey eyes and the mouth that had almost, once, remembered how to answer her. "You are the cursed Duke of Ravenscar." "Yes," said Nathaniel, Duke of Ravenscar, and carried her in over his own ruined threshold. "And now you have gone in, madam, and there is no one in this county who will believe you came out the same." The great door swung shut behind them, and closed off the last grey light of the drowning wood, and left her alone in the dark, with the man the whole world had agreed to forsake. The dark was not empty. That was the first thing she understood, as the great door boomed shut, that the blackness of the entrance hall had a shape to it, a cold-breathing vastness of stone above her, and somewhere far up in it, the rain drummed on a roof that no longer entirely held. Water was coming in somewhere. She could hear it falling, patient and steady, into a vessel that had been set to catch it. A small domestic sound absurd in all that ruin. "Mind your head," the Duke said, though her head was nowhere near anything, and she understood he did not know how to speak to a person he was carrying, and was making words simply to fill the space where fear might otherwise go. "You may set me down. I am not made of sugar. You are made of a turned ankle and a wet gown, and the floor here is broken in 3 places." He crossed the hall with the same sure, silent tread that had let him come up on her in the wood, and shouldered open a door she had not seen, and light fell out of it. Real light, gold and moving, firelight, mined the sill. The room beyond was small and low and, impossibly in that drowned grey shell, alive. A fire burned in a great blackened hearth. There were candles, a scarred oak table, a settle heaped with sheepskins, a wall of books gone soft and swollen at their spines with damp, a smell of wood smoke and tallow and old leather, and, underneath it, bread. It was the kitchen, or had been, and someone had made of it the one warm cell in a house of cold stone. He set her down on the settle as though she were made of the sugar she had denied being, and stepped back at once, and the loss of his warmth was a shock she had not braced for. "Well," she said, to cover it, "this is not what the village led me to expect. They gave me to understand you slept in a coffin and dined on the sorrows of the parish. The parish keeps its sorrows for itself. I have plenty of my own." He crouched to the fire and fed it, and the light ran red along the cords of his forearms and the wet dark of his hair. "You are shivering. I am observing that you are shivering, and being too proud to." The corner of his mouth did the thing again, that small, stiff, forgotten movement, like a hinge working after a long rust. "Mrs. Hale keeps blankets in the press by the door," he said, instead of answering. "There is dry wool. I will send her to you." "There is a Mrs. Hale?" "There is a Mrs. Hale, and a Tom who is her nephew, and a garden that will feed the 3 of us if I keep the deer out of it, and that is the whole of the household of Ravenscar. He rose, and his height took the light with it, throwing his shadow up the swollen books. You expected me to be alone. I expected you to be a story. Stories do not keep a garden. For a moment he only looked at her, the grey eyes gone unreadable in the firelight, the old scar a pale thread through his brow. Then, from the doorway behind him, a voice like a currant bun, round, dry, and entirely unimpressed, said, "So the bird has finally brought something home worth the trouble." I did wonder what all that carrying on in the limes was about. The woman who came in was small and square and 60, with a face like a walnut and hands red from work. A shawl crossed hard over her chest against the wet. She took in Isabel, the mud, the sketchbook still clutched to her chest, the boot she was holding off the floor, with one raking, comprehensive glance. And then she turned it on the Duke with exactly the same expression she might have given a dog that had brought a hedgehog into a clean kitchen. "Your Grace has fetched a young lady in off the wood in a thunderstorm," she said, and carried her over the threshold, in front of Tom and half the crows in the county, and God. "Mrs. Hale, I'm only saying what her aunt will say, and what the village will say, and what the magistrate will say, which is more to the purpose." She was already at the press, already dragging out blankets, already crossing the room to Isabel, with the wool held out. "Here, my lamb, off with the wet. There's a screen behind you, and no one to see. What's your name, and whose are you?" "Isabel Hart. I am Prudence Fenwick's great niece." "At Larkspur Cottage." Isabel took the blanket. It smelled of lavender and smoke. "And I followed a raven, and I have made everyone's day a great deal more complicated than it needed to be, and I am very sorry." Fenwick's girl, Mrs. Hale, went still, the way Prudence had gone still in the garden, and something passed over the walnut face. A calculation, a recognition, a swift and private weighing. She glanced at the Duke. He was looking into the fire and had heard none of it, or was pretending to. "Well," the housekeeper said, "softer, then you'll have heard the tales. And you'll know already there's not a word of truth in the worst of them, and a deal more than the village guesses in the rest. Get behind the screen, child, before you take a chill. His Grace will find something to do with his eyes." Isabel went behind the screen. She heard the Duke go out, heard the door, the drum of rain, his low voice somewhere in the cold hall calling for Tom, giving instructions in that flat, certain tone. A lantern, the far track, word to the cottage that the young lady was safe and dry, and would come home when the water fell. She peeled the sodden gown from her shoulders with numb fingers and wrapped herself in the smoke and lavender wool. And she found, to her own surprise, that she was not afraid at all. She was, for the first time since March, awake. "He carried me a mile in the rain," she said over the screen, "and he called it a house I would not thank him for." "Is he always so cheerful?" A dry snort from the hearth. "He is always so honest. It comes to much the same, in a man who's had his fill of being lied about." A pause, the clink of a kettle set on the crane. "You'll want the truth of it from someone, and you'll not get it from him, so you may as well have it from me while the tea draws. 5 years ago there was a fire in the West Wing. The old Duke did not come out of it. This one did. He came out with that mark on his face, carrying a thing over his shoulder he shouldn't have been able to lift. And the county looked at a son who lived where his father was lost, and decided the arithmetic wanted explaining." Isabel came round the screen wrapped in wool, her wet hair dark down her back, and lowered herself to the settle. "And did he explain it?" "He did not say one word." Mrs. Hale poured, her red hands steady. "Not at the inquest, not to the magistrate, not to his own aunt the dowager when she came down from London to weep at him. Not a word, from that day to this. A man who won't defend himself, the world decides, has something to hide. And so they made him the monster of Ravenscar Wood, and he let them, because a monster is left alone, and being left alone was the only mercy he'd any use for." She put the cup into Isabel's hands. "Drink, you've a colour like a plucked goose." Why are you telling me this?" The old woman looked at her a long moment over the steam. "Because," she said, "in 5 years that bird has never once brought a soul down that path. And I am too old to believe in accidents." The door opened on the wind, and the Duke came back in with the rain on him, and did not ask what they had been speaking of, though the silence told him plainly enough. The storm did not fall so much as decide to stay. By the time Tom had gone splashing off into the dark with his lantern and his instructions, the light was wholly gone from the world outside, and the rain had settled into the long, drumming, patient roar of a summer flood that meant to last the night. Mrs. Hale fed them at the scarred table, a soup of the garden's own leeks, bread she had baked that morning, a wedge of hard cheese, and then she took herself off to her own quarters with a candle and a look at the Duke that carried a whole sermon in it, and left the two of them alone, with the fire, and the rain, and the swollen books. For a while, neither spoke. Isabel had her hurt foot up on the settle, and her sketchbook open on her knee, and she was doing what she always did when a room grew too full of unsaid things. She was drawing it. The hearth, the crane, the great copper vessel catching the roof's slow leak, and him, though she did not let him see that, the line of his shoulder against the firelight, the bowed head, the big careful hands turning a cup he was not drinking from. "You draw everything," he said. He had been watching her after all. "I draw what will hold still. It is a short list, these days." She turned the page toward him before she could think better of it. The sundial, the ivy, the ruined avenue, all caught in wet grey pencil, an hour before she knew whose ruin it was. "That was your garden. Before I knew it was yours." He took the book. She had not expected that. She had expected him to look, and nod, and give it back. Instead, he held it under the candle, and went very still, and something happened in the hard face that she had no name for, something that came up from a long way down. "My mother laid out that walk," he said at last. "Lo, the limes. She had them brought from Holland, the year I was born. There was a fashion for it." His thumb moved over the penciled avenue, not quite touching it, the way a man touches a thing he is afraid to wake. "I have not been able to look at it in 5 years. And you have gone and made it." He stopped. "Set the book down as though it had grown heavy. You have made it beautiful again. That was cruel of you, and you did not know you were doing it, which is worse. I am sorry. Do not be. It is the first." He shut his mouth on whatever it was, rose, crossed to the fire, and stood with his back to her, and the width of him blocked the light entirely, so that she sat in his shadow. "You should sleep. Mrs. Hale has made up the small room off the passage. It is dry, or dry enough. In the morning the water will be down, and Tom will take you home, and this will be a story you tell against yourself at parties for the rest of your life. The night you were carried into the cursed Duke's house, and nothing at all happened. Is that what you want it to be? A story that ends in nothing happening?" He did not turn round. "I want you to go home safe and forget the way here." His voice was perfectly even. "It is the only kind thing left in me to want." She should have let it lie. She knew she should have let it lie. But she had spent 3 months being handled gently by people who were quietly relieved to be rid of her, and there was something in this man's grim iron courtesy that made her want, quite violently, to break it open and see what was underneath. "Mrs. Hale told me you never said a word," she said. "At the inquest, to anyone. She thinks it is why they turned on you. That a man who will not defend himself hands the world permission to invent him. The stillness of his back was total. What happened in the fire, Your Grace?" "That," he said, "is none of your affair." "No, it is not, and yet you carried me a mile through it. And you have not once looked at me the way the whole of Witchcombe looks at me, and I find I would rather know the true thing about you than go on being told the false one. I have some experience of being the false one. It is a lonely office. She heard her own voice shake and steadied it. "I only ask what you did." He turned then, and the grief in his face was so raw, so entirely without the armor he wore for the world, that she wished she had never asked. "I did nothing," he said. "That is the answer you want, and it is the true one, and it will do you no good at all." "I did nothing, madam, and a better man would have done everything, and the county is right about me in every particular except the ones they can put a name to. Now go to bed." The rain filled the silence. Somewhere above them, the copper vessel took another slow drop and rang like a small cracked bell. Isabel gathered her sketchbook and her blanket and got herself up off the settle, one hand on the settle arm, favoring the foot. At the passage door she stopped. "You did not carry your father out of a fire 5 years ago and leave nothing of yourself behind in it," she said, quietly. "Nobody could. Whatever it was you did, or did not do, you are still in there, paying for it, every day, in a burnt house at the edge of the world, with 3 servants and a bird. That is not the behavior of a monster. It is the behavior of a man serving a sentence he handed down himself." She lifted her chin. "Good night, Your Grace. Thank you for the rescue. I shall try to keep the story dull for your sake, but I make no promises. I am told I am not naturally dull." She went down the passage and left him there, and she did not see, could not have seen, the way he sat down slowly by the fire and put his ruined hands over his face and stayed that way a long while, as the rain came down on the drowned wood and the raven slept in the burnt arch of the west wing above him. She woke to the ordinary miracle of birdsong and a room full of watery gold. The storm had emptied itself in the night and left the world rinsed and glittering. Through the small warped pane she could see the great overgrown lawn steaming gently as the July sun came up over the trees, and every blade of it strung with rain like a spilled jeweler's tray. Her ankle, when she tried it, held her, sore, stiff, but sound. She dressed in her gown that Mrs. Hale had somehow got dry by the kitchen fire, and she went out to find the house. She did not mean to pry. She told herself that, going along the cold stone passage in the morning light, past doors that opened on empty rooms with furniture under sheets like a company of ghosts. She only meant to find the kitchen and her breakfast and her way home. But the passage turned, and turned again, and let her out at the foot of a great scorched staircase, and there, at the turn of the stair where the light came grey through a broken window, hung a portrait that stopped her where she stood. A woman, painted young, in the fashion of 30 years gone, dark-haired, grey-eyed, with a wide, clever mouth caught on the edge of a smile, and in her arms a great tumble of Holland lilies, and behind her, unmistakable, an avenue of newly planted limes. The Duke's mother. It could be no one else. The face was his, softened and made merry. And below the portrait, on a small table beneath a fall of grey dust, lay a child's wooden horse, its paint worn to the grain, set down as carefully as an offering at a shrine, and never once moved since. Isabel stood before it a long time, and understood a great many things she had not been told. "You are up," the Duke said behind her. He had come along the passage in the silent way he had, and he stood at the stair-foot with a jug of milk in one hand, caught, absurdly, in the middle of the smallest domestic errand, the terrible master of Ravenscar fetching milk. His eyes went past her to the portrait and away again, fast, the way one snatches a hand from a flame. "You should not be in this part of the house." "No. I keep being told where I should not be." She did not move from the portrait. "She is lovely. And you have her mouth when you forget to guard it." Isabel. It was the first time he had used her name, and it stopped them both. He seemed not to have meant to. "Miss Hart," he corrected. "Lo, your aunt will be beside herself. Tom is bringing the cart round. It is time you were." The great door boomed. Not a knock, a blow. The flat of a hand or the head of a cane, driven hard against oak. And again, and a voice pitched to carry through stone. "Ravenscar. I know you are within. Your man is in the yard, and cannot lie for toffee. Ravenscar, open this door. I have ridden from Witchcombe in the wet, and I am in no humour to be kept on your step. The change in the Duke was immediate and total. Every soft thing the portrait had put into his face went out of it like a snuffed candle. The door slammed down behind the grey eyes. His whole body set itself, and Isabel, watching, thought, "This is the face they mean. This is the monster. And it is not grief that makes it. It is that man." "Go back to the kitchen," he said, very quietly. "Now, if you please." But it was too late, because the door was already opening. Mrs. Hale had gone to it, unable to do otherwise, and a gentleman was already stepping over the ruined threshold, shaking the wet from a many-caped driving coat, drawing off his gloves finger by finger, with the unhurried ease of a man who has never in his life been kept waiting long. He was fair where the Duke was dark, and slighter, and dressed with a town polish absurdly out of place in that burnt hall. And he was beautiful, genuinely, coldly beautiful, with a smooth, handsome face and pale blue eyes, and a smile that arrived on his mouth without troubling the rest of him at all. His gaze went round the hall, up the scorched stair, over Isabel in her creased gown at the portrait's foot, and back to the Duke, and the smile widened by exactly the width it needed to become an insult. "My dear cousin," he said, "how well you look, and, forgive me, company, at Ravenscar? I had understood you kept no society but the Corvids." The pale eyes came back to Isabel, and moved over her, mud, and creased muslin and loose hair, and drew every possible conclusion with visible, leisurely pleasure. "And a young lady, who has, I collect, passed the night. How very unexpected of you, Nathaniel. The county will be enthralled. Get out of my house, Silas. Your house." Silas Ravenscar strolled forward across the broken floor as though he owned it, and the dreadful thing, Isabel saw, was that he strolled like a man who fully intended to. Yes, about that. He drew a folded paper from inside his coat, cream-laid, heavy, sealed with a blot of red wax, and held it up between two fingers where the grey light could catch it. "I've come down expressly to speak of the house, and of your health, cousin, which weighs on me, it truly does. For a man who shuts himself in a ruin and talks to birds, and now, it seems, carries fainting maidens off into the wood, is a man whose friends must begin to ask, in kindness, whether he is altogether fit to have the managing of an estate this size." The smile again, sweet as poison. "There are those in London who have begun to ask it already. I have their letters. I thought you should hear it from family first." The paper hung in the air between them. The raven, on the parapet outside the broken window, put back its head and cried once, harsh and echoing, into the shining wreckage of the wood, and Isabel, standing between the two beautiful, dangerous men in that drowned and burning house, felt the ground she had wandered on to shift and open beneath her feet, and understood that she had walked into something a great deal deeper than a storm. The paper did not move. That was the thing Isabel would remember, but Silas Ravenscar held the cream-laid sheet up between two gloved fingers and let it hang in the grey light, unread, unopened, and made the whole burnt hall wait on it as though it were a sacrament. "You will put that away," Nathaniel said, "and you will take yourself off my land, and you will not come back." Your land. Silas turned the phrase over on his tongue, tasting it, and let his pale gaze wander up the scorched stair to the broken window and the wet sky beyond. "Do you know, cousin, I begin to think you say that word too often, and to too few people, and that is the whole of your difficulty. A man who is sure of a thing does not need to keep saying it aloud." He lowered the paper at last and tapped it, softly, against his own palm. "6 gentlemen have signed their names to this. Gentlemen of standing, physicians among them, and a magistrate, and one who sat in the last Parliament. It is a memorial, a petition, if you like plain words, and I know you do, praying that the affairs of the Ravenscar estate be examined, on the grounds that the present Duke has withdrawn from all society, refuses all correspondence, keeps no company but his servants and his birds, and has now, this very week, been seen to carry a young gentlewoman off into his wood against the plain warnings of the county. She turned her ankle in a flood. I am sure she did. The smile arrived, and did not reach the pale eyes. How fortunate that you were on hand to catch her. Isabel's fingers had gone white on the newel of the stair. She had listened to men speak of her in that tone before, the tone that made a woman a fact in an argument, rather than a person in a room, and she had learned at cost that silence only lent it weight. "I am here," she said, "and I can answer for myself, sir, which spares you the trouble of inventing me." Silas turned to her with the delight of a man who has found an unexpected coin in the road. It speaks. It reads, too, and does sums, and can tell a threat from a kindness at 40 paces in poor light. She came down one step, then another, her sore foot set carefully, her chin level. "You have ridden a long way in the wet to frighten your cousin, and you have brought 6 signatures to do it, which suggests to me you could not manage it with your own. That is not the errand of a man who is sure of a thing, either." For a moment the smooth face did not know what to do with itself. Then Silas laughed, a real laugh, short and surprised, and inclined his head to her as though she had scored a hit in a drawing room, and he were gentleman enough to own it. "Nathaniel," he said, without looking away from her, "she is charming. Wherever did you find her? No, do not tell me. I shall enjoy the guessing, and so, I promise you, will Whitcomb." The raven cried again from the parapet, harsh and near, and the sound seemed to put iron back into the Duke. He crossed the broken floor in 3 strides and put himself between his cousin and the stair, between Silas and Isabel, and the width of him closed the pale man off from her like a shutter drawn across a window. "You will not speak to her," he said, very low. "You will not speak of her. Whatever you have come to do to me, you will do to me, and you will leave her out of it, or I promise you, cousin, I will forget every reason I have ever had to be patient with your name." Silas looked up at him for a long moment. Something crossed the beautiful face. Not fear, Isabel thought, watching over the Duke's shoulder. Something colder and more pleased. The look of a fisherman who has felt the line go tight at last. "There," Silas breathed. "There it is. Do you know, in 5 years I have not once seen you rise to anything. Not the inquest, not the magistrate, not poor Aunt Augusta on her knees in this very hall begging you to say a single word in your own defense. I began to think there was nothing left in you to reach." He drew back a half step and looked from the Duke to Isabel, and back again, and the tightness of the smile became something like triumph. "And it turns out the whole time I only wanted the right lever. How very useful. How very unexpectedly useful." The rain dripped, patient, into the copper vessel somewhere behind the wall. "Get out," Nathaniel said. Presently, Silas drew on one glove again, unhurried, finger by finger, precisely as he had drawn it off. "I am a guest, cousin, and it is still raining, and I have not finished admiring what the fire left you. But I will trouble you for the loan of your kitchen fire and a dry half-hour, and then I shall go, and you may return to your birds." His gaze slid past the Duke to Isabel one last time, and dropped, deliberate and slow, to the mud at her hem and the loose dark fall of her hair, and came back up, wearing its conclusion openly. "Miss Hart, was it? Mrs. Hale is not so discreet in the yard as she believes. Miss Hart, do let me offer you the shelter of my own carriage when I go. It is closed and clean, and it would be a very great pity for a respectable young woman to be seen walking out of this house in daylight on the arm of a servant's cart. People do talk so." He said it gently. That was the horror of it, that every word was gentle, and every word was a small, precise wound, and he watched her take each one with the mild interest of a man watching salt go into water. "Thank you," Isabel said, and was proud of how level she kept it. "I have already a way home." "Of course you have." Silas smiled, and turned, and walked himself toward the kitchen passage as though the burnt hall of Ravenscar belonged to him and always had. Mrs. Hale would not have him in her kitchen. She met him at the passage door, with her square body filling it, and her red hands folded, and a look on the walnut face that would have curdled cream. And she said, "There's a fire in the old steward's room, sir, and I'll bring you a cup there. And you'll want to be warm and dry for your road," in a voice so flatly, murderously polite, that even Silas, after a moment's pale-eyed consideration, chose not to make an argument of it. He went where she pointed. The door shut on him, and the three of them stood in the ringing quiet of the hall and breathed. "Well," said Mrs. Hale, "there's the cuckoo come into the nest, at last. I always said he'd come the day there was something here worth taking. I only never thought it would be a person." She turned her raking glance on Isabel, and it had gone gentle at the edges. "You did well, my lamb," standing to him. "Most don't. He's the kind that smiles you into agreeing with your own undoing." "Who is he?" Isabel asked. It was the Duke who answered, and his voice had gone dead flat and far away, the voice of a man reading out a thing he had read 1,000 times and could not stop reading. "Silas Ravenscar, my father's brother's son. When the fire took my father, I became the Duke, and the estate came to me, entailed, as it has come to the eldest of us for 200 years. He looked at the shut door of the steward's room. "And Silas became the next name on the list. If I have no son, and I shall have no son, then everything you see, the wood and the hall and the burnt wing, and the three of us who keep it, passes to him the day I am gone from it." A muscle moved in the hard jaw. "He has been waiting 5 years for me to save him the trouble of hurrying. I think he has grown tired of waiting." Isabel's mind, which had been trained by a hard spring to run ahead of trouble, ran ahead of it now. "A petition of unfitness," she said slowly. "If they examine your affairs, if 6 gentlemen and a magistrate declare you unsound, you cannot be a duke and a madman both. They would set the estate in other hands. In trust." She looked at the shut door. "In his." "In his," Nathaniel agreed. "Then he does not need you gone at all. He only needs the county to go on believing exactly what it already believes, that the man who came out of the fire is not to be trusted with a house or a horse or his own good name." She heard her own breath come short. "And you have spent 5 years being that man for them. On purpose. Because it left you alone." She looked up at him, appalled. "You built the very case he means to hang you with. You handed it to him, a plank at a time." The grey eyes came round to her, and for once there was nothing guarded in them at all, only a terrible, tired recognition, as of a man hearing a truth he has known so long it has stopped hurting and started merely being. "Yes," he said, "I did." Mrs. Hale looked between them, and something in the set of her mouth told Isabel the old woman had said this very thing, in these very words, more than once across the long years, and been answered with silence. She took up her tray. "I'll take his lordship his cup," she said grimly, "and I'll count the spoons after. Miss Hart, the small parlour's dry and there's the last of the fire in it. Sit. You'll not walk that ankle home till the water's off the low path, and I'll not have you in the yard where he can see you and add it to his sums." She fixed the Duke with a look. "And you'll leave the poor lamb be for 1/2 hour and not stand over her like the wrath of God, for you've a face on you this morning that would frighten the milk." The corner of Nathaniel's mouth moved. "The milk," he said, "is already frightened. I have been carrying it about the house for an hour, and it has not recovered from the shock of being wanted. It was so unexpected, so dry, so quiet, delivered without a flicker of the grim face, the jug still absurdly in his big scarred hand where he had held it since the stair, that Isabel laughed before she could stop herself, a startled bright sound that rang up into the scorched vault and surprised them all, the Duke most of all. He looked at her as though the laugh were a thing he had done by accident and could not quite account for. And for one unguarded moment the man from the portrait was there, in his face, the woman's wide, clever mouth surfacing through the ruin, and Isabel thought, with a lurch that had nothing to do with her ankle, "Oh, There you are." Then Mrs. Hale bore the tray off toward the steward's room, and the moment closed over, and they were left with the rain and the graver thing. The small parlour had been a pretty room once. She could see the ghost of it under the damp, the faded silk on the walls gone the colour of old tea, the good plaster cornice with its swags of fruit, a window seat where a woman might have sat with her work in the long light of a summer evening 30 years gone. Now the silk peeled in soft tongues, and the last of a low fire smoked in the grate, and the whole room smelled of ash and mildew, and, faintly, of the wild honeysuckle that had got in at the broken casement and climbed the inside of the wall. Isabel sat on the window seat because it was dry, and the Duke stood, because he did not seem to know how to do anything else in that house but stand and endure it. "You should take his carriage," he said abruptly. She had not expected that. "I beg your pardon?" "Silas's carriage. It is closed. It is what he said. A woman seen walking out of here on a cart, in daylight, will be talked of. In his carriage, with a servant up beside the coachman. You would be—" He stopped, and made himself say it. "You would be a lady he found stranded, and civilly conveyed home. It would be a different story. A safer one, for you. And a very much better one for him." Isabel stared at him. "You cannot be in earnest. You have just told me that man means to prove you unfit and take everything you have, and now you would put me in his carriage to save my reputation. He would use it. He would use me. He would tell the whole county he pulled a ruined girl out of the Mad Duke's clutches and drove her safe home out of Christian charity, and every soul in Witchcombe would love him for it, and it would be one more signature on his petition, that even the women you take up have to be rescued from you." "Yes," said Nathaniel. "It would, and you would be home, and dry, and named as his rescue instead of my ruin, and in a year no one would remember which Duke's cousin had carried you where. That is worth more than my petition, Miss Hart. It is worth a great deal more than my petition." He turned to the smoking fire so she could not see his face. "I have already cost you a knight's reputation by carrying you over that threshold. I will not cost you the rest of your life by being proud about the manner of your going home." She was on her feet before she had decided to be, the sore ankle taking her weight in a bright complaint she ignored. "Do not do that," she said. "Do not stand there, arranging my ruin into the least inconvenient shape and call it kindness. I have had that kindness. I had a whole spring of it, of people being so very gentle with me while they closed their doors, of being handled and settled and disposed of everyone deciding what was best for the poor heart girl, and never once, not one of them, asking what I should like. You do not get to be one more of them." Her voice cracked, and she let it. "I would rather walk home on a cart in the rain in front of God and Silas Ravenscar and all the crows in the county than be tidied into that man's carriage to spare you the discomfort of having been my rescuer. Do you understand me? I am not a stain to be got out of your linen before the visitors come." He turned, and the look on his face was so raw, so completely without the iron, that she almost took it back. "You do not know what it is," he said, low, "to be the thing that ruins whatever it touches, to carry it about with you like a fever, so that the only mercy you have left to give anyone is to keep away from them. That is why the wood. That is why the birds. Not because I am a monster, Isabel, because I am a contagion, and I have at least the decency to keep to my own trees." The name again, unmeant, and this time he did not correct it. "I let you into this house to keep you out of a flood, and already, in one morning, you have a petition with your presence in it, and a smiling man in my steward's room, composing the sentence that will follow you the rest of your days. That is what I do. That is all I have ever done since the night of the fire. I take what is whole, and I leave it burnt." He drew a breath that shook. "So yes, I would put you in his carriage. Because the worst thing I can do to you now is to let you go on standing there, being kind to me." The rain filled the silence. Somewhere the copper vessel rang its small cracked note, What happened in the fire, Isabel said quietly, that you will not tell them, and will not tell me, and have carried 5 years without setting down. For a moment she thought he would answer. She saw it come up in him, saw the words move to the surface, saw the whole guarded face begin, terribly to open, and then, from the passage, quick and light and pleased, came Silas Ravenscar's voice. There you are. He stood in the parlor doorway, dry now, warmed, drawing on his second glove, and his pale eyes went from the Duke to Isabel, and read the closeness of them, the charged air, the unfinished sentence hanging between, and put every one of them into his private ledger with visible satisfaction. I am for the road, cousin, before the low path floods and strands me in this delightful company overnight, though I confess the temptation. Aunt Augusta sends her love, by the way. I did not mention. She is coming down. Nathaniel went still. She is in London. She was in London. She is at the Witchcombe Arms by Thursday, at my particular urging, to see for herself how her nephew does, and to lend her name, dear soul, to a matter of family business that has grown too heavy for one cousin to carry alone. The smile. She is the last of the elder generation, you know. A dowager duchess. Her word on your fitness, Nathaniel, or your want of it, will weigh with the commissioners more than all 6 of my signatures together. And she has not forgiven you the fire. You never gave her a reason to. He settled his hat. Thursday, then, I do hope, by the time she comes, you will have contrived to send your charming guest safely home for her sake, cousin, truly. It would go so very ill for a young woman to be found still here when the Dowager Duchess of Ravenscar arrives to sit in judgment on the man who kept her. He bowed to Isabel, low and graceful, and entirely without warmth. Miss Hart, the offer of my carriage stands until my wheels turn. After that I fear you are on your own road. And he was gone, out through the ringing hall, and they heard the great door groan open, and the wet air come in, and the door boom shut, and then, distant, the crunch and jingle of a carriage taking the long drive down toward the drowned wood. Isabel found she had sat down again on the window seat without knowing it. Thursday, she said. Thursday, the Duke had not moved. He looked, she thought, like a man watching a tide he had always known would come at last stand up dark on the horizon. Augusta will not have changed. She came here once, after, and stood in this hall, and asked me to my face to swear I had done everything a son could do, and I would not swear it, because I could not, and she went away and has spoken of me since as one speaks of a thing best not named at table. If she gives Silas her word, the commission is a formality. They will examine me, and I will not defend myself, because I do not know how to, and never have, and by Michaelmas there will be a keeper in this house, and Silas's man in the steward's room, and I. He stopped. It does not matter what becomes of me. It matters that you are not here on Thursday. He has told you as much himself, which means he means the opposite. He would like nothing better than for the Dowager to find you here. Do you see? You are the lever now. You said it yourself last night. A woman who will not defend herself hands the world permission to invent her. You must go home. Today, on the cart, on his carriage, on your own 2 feet. I do not care which any longer. Only go, and let this be a house you were never in. And there it was, the door swinging shut in his voice again, the iron coming back down, the man closing himself off the way the great door closed off the light. He was sending her away. Not to Silas's carriage this time, but out of the whole story, out of the reach of the thing that was coming, and he was doing it the way he did everything, alone and certain, and without asking, and calling it the only kindness left in him. Isabel looked at him for a long moment, at the scar, and the grey eyes, and the mouth that had made her laugh not half an hour since, and the ruined room, and the child's memory of a house this had once been, a woman's window seat, a fashion for Holland limes the year he was born. No, she said. He blinked. Miss Hart. No, I have thought about it, and I find I will not." She stood, carefully, and she was surprised to find her voice quite steady. "You want to be left alone to lose everything with dignity, because losing it alone is the only shape of losing you have practiced, and you are very good at it, and I will not help you. A bird came for me 3 mornings running, because it wanted me, and nothing else in the world did, and I have been more awake in 1 night in this drowning ruin than in 3 months of being handled gently, and I am not, now, going to go home and let a smiling man take a house from someone because he was too proud to be defended." She caught up her sketchbook from the window seat and held it to her chest like a shield. "You did nothing in the fire. You have told me so twice, and both times as though it were a confession. And I do not think it is. I think it is the truth, and I think there is a great deal more truth behind it that you have never once said aloud, and I think Silas Ravenscar is terrified you will say it before Thursday. Why else come himself? Why else the carriage, the warnings, the great show of getting me gone? He does not want me here, because I might see something. So I am going to stay until I have seen it. You cannot stay. Then I shall go home to my aunt," she said, "who is Prudence Fenwick, who Mrs. Hale went still at the name of, and who has known this valley 80 years, and who I begin to think knows a great deal more about the night of your fire than she has ever told a soul. And I shall come back before Thursday, over the grey stones, in daylight, in front of the whole of Witchcombe, and let them make of it what they will, because I have discovered, Your Grace, that I have nothing left to lose that is worth keeping if the price of keeping it is you." She stopped, appalled at herself, the words out and past recall in the ashy air. He stared at her as though she had struck him. Outside, faint and far, the raven lifted off the burnt parapet and flung itself out over the wet, shining wood after the retreating carriage, cawing once, twice, 3 times into the clearing sky, and Isabel Hart, standing in the ruined parlour of the house the whole world had forsaken, felt the last quiet door of her old careful life swing shut behind her, and stepped, wide awake and unafraid, across the point past which there would be no going back. She came out of the wood the way she had gone into it, over the grey boundary stones with their coats of yellow lichen, but the woman who climbed back up into the hot July light was not the one who had climbed down. The valley steamed, every hedge dripped, every leaf threw back the sun in hard bright points, and the whole world smelled of wet earth drying, of nettles and cut hay, and the sweetness of the honeysuckle steaming in the heat. Her ankles sang at every step. She barely felt it. She went up the lane to Larkspur Cottage, with her sketchbook against her chest, and Silas Ravenscar's smiling face in her mind. And she found her great-aunt on the bench, by the sweet peas, exactly where she had left her the day before. As though the old woman had simply sat through the storm and the night and the whole turning of the world, and waited for her to come to her senses. "So," said Prudence Fenwick. She did not look up from her thread. Her stick lay across her knees. "You went in, I went in, and you came out." A dry pause. "And here we are, and you have the look your mother had the one time in her life she was right about something and knew it would cost her. Sit down before you fall down. You have walked that ankle raw, and I can hear it from here." Isabel sat. The bench was warm from the sun and her aunt. A bee worked the sweet peas, heavy and slow. For a moment neither spoke, and the ordinary garden hummed around them, and the great grey ruin in the trees might have been a thing she had dreamed. "Aunt Prudence," she said, "you went still when Mrs. Hale said my name to me. And Mrs. Hale went still when I said yours to her, and I have lain awake half the night working out why 2 old women at either end of a cursed wood should both flinch at the name Fenwick." She turned on the bench. "Your husband. My great-uncle. John Fenwick. What was he? At Ravenscar?" The old woman's needle stopped. "He was the steward," Prudence said at last, very quietly. 30 years. He kept their books, and their fences, and their secrets, and he loved that family more than was good for a sensible man, and it took the heart out of him at the end. And I have not spoken of it in 5 years to a living soul, because there was no soul it would have done any good to speak to. She set the thread down in her lap. Ask me then, you have opened the box. You had better take out what is in it. Tell me about Silas. Something crossed the seamed old face. Not surprise. Relief, Isabel thought, the terrible relief of a weight set down. Silas Ravenscar, Prudence said, has been robbing that estate since he was old enough to hold a pen and copy another man's hand. Rents that came in and never reached the books. Timber sold that no one felled. My John found it, 3 winters of it, forged in the old Duke's own signature, so neat you could not tell the false from the true, but that the money was gone. He carried it to the old Duke himself, the spring before the fire, with his hat in his hands, expecting to be turned off for a liar. She drew a slow breath. He was not turned off. The old Duke went the color of ash and thanked him and told him to say nothing to a living soul until he had seen his solicitor and put a stop to it. He meant to cut Silas off entire. Legacy, allowance, the door. He had the appointment made. And the fire came first. The fire came first. The old woman's mouth folded hard, the very weak, before the ink was dry on the letter to the lawyer. And the one man who could have proved why, my John, was so broken by it, by the loss of the master he'd served all his life, that he was gone himself inside the 12th and took what he knew into the churchyard with him. Or so the whole valley believed. Isabel's heart had begun to beat very hard. So the whole valley believed, she repeated. But not you. Prudence looked at her a long moment. Then she rose, slowly, on her stick, and went into the cottage, and came back with a thing wrapped in oilcloth that she had plainly kept close for 5 years and never once shown. She put it into Isabel's hands. It was heavy. It was a ledger, worn black at the corners, and folded inside its cover was a sheaf of loose sheets in 2 hands, one broad and honest, one fine and false, and beautiful. My John's book, Prudence said. And the forged accounts that he copied out himself, in the true against the false, so that any fool could set them side by side and see the theft. He gave them to me the night before he was taken poorly, and he said, Prue, keep these until there is a Ravenscar left worth giving them to. And I have kept them. And I looked at that boy up in his burnt house all these years, silent as the grave, letting the county call him a monster, and I thought there is no one worth giving them to, and I held my peace. Her voice cracked, dry as a page tearing. And then a bird brought you down that path, and you came home this morning with your chin up and your ankle ruined, and a look on you I have not seen since your uncle went out that gate for the last time. And I find I am too old, Isabel, to go on believing that God has run clean out of ideas. Isabel looked down at the ledger in her lap, at the true hand and the false laid side by side, and understood that she was holding the thing that Silas Ravenscar had ridden 50 miles in the rain to keep buried. He knows this exists, she said slowly. That is why the carriage. Why the show of getting me gone. He is not afraid of the Duke. The Duke has been silent 5 years, and Silas has built his whole scheme on that silence. He is afraid of what a stranger might find, who is not bound by any promise. He is afraid of you, Aunt. He has always been afraid of you, and you never knew it. Then, said Prudence Fenwick, and sat back down very heavily on the warm bench, you had best not let that ledger out of your 2 hands between here and Thursday. Because I will tell you what your smiling cousin of the Duke will do the moment he understands what an old steward's widow has been keeping in her linen press. And it will not be gentle. For all his gentle voice, she did not wait for Thursday to go back. She went the next morning, in the full clean light of it, over the grey stones with the ledger wrapped in oilcloth, and bound with garden twine, and held hard under her arm. And this time no raven came to lead her, because she no longer needed leading. She knew the path now. She knew the drowned garden, the blank sundial. The avenue of Holland limes her feet had learned in the storm. She came up out of the trees onto the great steaming lawn, and the hall reared grey and enormous against a sky washed innocent blue, and the raven himself lifted from the burnt parapet and flung down to meet her, cawing, wheeling once about her head, as though to say, at last, and led her the last 100 yards to the door as if he had arranged the whole of it. Which, she was beginning to think, he had. Nathaniel came out before she reached the step. He must have seen her from the wood's edge. He stood in the great scorched doorway under the carved raven, with the sun full on the hard, beautiful, ruined face, and for one unguarded instant, before the iron came down, she saw what her coming did to him. He had thought she was gone for good. He had made himself glad of it. And here she was. "You came back," he said. "Over the stones, in daylight, in front of God and the whole of Witchcombe." He came down the broken steps. "You have undone in one morning everything I tried to buy you. I have brought you something better than my absence." She held out the oilcloth bundle. "Take it inside. Sit down. And I am going to make you do the one thing in 5 years that no one has been able to make you do." She lifted her chin. "You are going to talk to me. And then you are going to talk to your Aunt Augusta on Thursday. And you are going to talk to a magistrate. And you are going to talk to God, if he will hear you. Because I have found out what Silas is so very frightened you will say. And I am not, now, going to stand by and let you go on being too honorable to save your own life." She saw the word land. She saw him flinch from life the way another man flinches from a blow, and she took his earth-stained hand in both of hers, ledger and all, and pulled him back over his own threshold into the warm cell of the kitchen, where the fire burned and the copper vessel had been emptied, and the swollen books leaned in their ranks, and she sat him down at the scarred table and put the ledger in front of him and unwound the twine. He opened it. He read. She watched the truth of it go through him, the true hand and the false, the 3 winters of theft, the summer his father had discovered it and made his fatal appointment with the law, and she watched his own long silence break under the weight of another man's honest bookkeeping. "John Fenwick," he said, low. "He came to me. After, he tried to come to me, and I would not see him. I would not see anyone." His thumb moved over the false, beautiful signature that was his father's and was not. "I have let his widow keep this 5 years alone. Because I could not. Because I made a promise, and I did not once see, that the promise had turned in my hand into the very knife." He stopped. He put his ruined hands flat on the table and bowed his dark head, and when he spoke again his voice had gone down to nothing. "You want the truth of the fire. I want the truth of the fire. Then have it, and God forgive me for keeping it." He did not look up. Silas came that night. He knew. Someone in town had warned him. He knew my father had found the forgeries and meant to see the lawyer in the morning. He came to talk his way out of it, the way he talks his way out of everything, and my father would not be talked to. And they quarrelled in the study in the west wing where all the papers were, and a lamp went over. His hands closed slowly on the table. I do not think he meant the fire. I have told myself that 10,000 nights. I think he meant only the papers, to be rid of the proof. One careless swing of his arm, and the oil ran, and the old dry panelling took it, and by the time I came down from the other end of the house, it had walked the whole west wing, and Silas was already on his horse. I saw him go. I stood in the yard with the whole wing alight behind me, and I watched my cousin ride away, and then I went in. Isabel had not moved. The fire ticked. Outside a wood pigeon called and was answered. "I got to him," Nathaniel said. "My father. I carried him out. Mrs. Hale will have told you, a thing over my shoulder I should not have been able to lift. I did not feel the weight. I have never in my life since been able to lift anything that felt so light." His voice did not break. It was past breaking. He was with me a little while, on the wet grass, before the end came, long enough to tell me it was Silas, and how, and that no one would believe a word of it against a Ravenscar of the pretty branch and a duke's own boy of the burnt one. And long enough to ask me, he stopped. He made himself say it. He asked me to keep it in the family. Not for Silas's sake, for ours. Do not let them say a Ravenscar burned his own father's house for money, he said. Do not hand the world that. Keep the name whole, whatever it costs you. And I gave him my word, because it was the last thing I had left to give him, and I have kept it. And it has cost me everything. It has cost me everything he was trying to save. Oh, Isabel said softly. Nathaniel, he did not know, the Duke said. How could he know? He thought he was asking me to swallow a season's scandal. He did not know he was asking me to hand Silas the estate a plank at a time, to let myself be made the monster, so the true one could go on smiling. I kept faith with a promise that stopped meaning what he meant the day they closed the inquest, and I could not see it. Or I could, and I let myself not, because being the monster was easier than breaking my word over my own father. He looked up at last, grey eyes drowned and clear. That is what I did in the fire, Isabel. I carried him out too late, and I gave him my word, and I have been keeping the wrong faith ever since. There is no version of it in which I am not to blame for something. There is the version, Isabel said, and reached across the scarred table and took his face in her ink-stained hands, careful of the scar. The way one touches a thing one is afraid to wake, in which a man of 21 ran into a burning house that everyone else ran out of, and carried out the one person he loved most in the world, and made him a promise on the wet grass because there was nothing else his hands could do. And then kept that promise for 5 years at the cost of his whole good name, because he was honourable to the marrow, and grief had convinced him he deserved the punishment. That is not a monster, Your Grace. I have met the monster. He drove off in a closed carriage yesterday, smiling, and he is coming back on Thursday, with your aunt on his arm, to finish what the fire began. Her thumbs moved over his cheekbones. Your father asked you to keep the name whole. Silas is the one dragging it through the mud, and has been all along. Keeping faith with your father does not mean protecting the man who took him from you. It means stopping him. It has always meant stopping him. You have simply been too deep in it to see which way round the promise points. He stared at her as though she had lit a candle in a room he had lived in blind for 5 years. You make it sound, he said unsteadily, almost like something a man could survive. You have survived it. That is rather the point. You have been surviving it, badly and alone, in a burnt house with 3 servants and a bird, for 5 years. She let a smile come. I only propose that you try surviving it differently, with witnesses, and an excellent ledger, and a woman who followed a raven into your wood, against the advice of every sensible soul in the county, and finds she has not the smallest intention of leaving. And Nathaniel, Duke of Ravenscar, who had not been touched in kindness in 5 years by anyone but a walnut-faced housekeeper and a bird, turned his scarred face into her ink-stained hand and, for the length of one shaking breath, let himself be held. Then he kissed her. It was not calm, and it was not chosen, and it was driven by 5 years of silence coming down all at once. His big, careful hand came up into her damp, dark hair, and hers fisted in his rough shirt, and the kiss tasted of wood smoke and salt, and the wild honeysuckle at the broken casement, and when it ended they were both undone, and neither of them was sorry. Well, Isabel managed, breathless, her forehead against his. That is thoroughly compromising. I do hope the milk was not watching. She felt the laugh go through his whole chest, a real one, rusty and astonished, and thought, again, oh. There you are. Thursday came down over the valley hot and still, the sky a hard enamel blue, the wood hanging heavy and green and silent, as though it too were holding its breath. They did not wait to be surprised. Mrs. Hale had the burnt hall swept, and the good chairs dragged in from under their sheets. Tom stood at the door in his one clean coat, and Isabel, who had gone home to Prudence, and come back in her one good gown, amber muslin that made the most of her against all that grey stone, stood at the foot of the scorched stair, with the ledger in her 2 hands and her chin level, exactly where Silas had first found her, and this time she was not afraid at all. The carriage came up the drive a little before noon. They heard the wheels, the jingle, the crunch on the wet gravel, and then the great door opened, and the Dowager Duchess of Ravenscar came in over the ruined threshold on her nephew Silas's arm. She was very old and very upright, dressed in dove-grey silk with a fall of black lace, and beautiful still in the ruthless architectural way of women who have been handsome all their lives and never once forgiven the world for anything. Her eyes were Nathaniel's grey, and the old Duke's, and she swept them once round the burnt hall, the scorched stair, the broken window, the raven's carved wings above the door, and her mouth set like a seam in stone. She had loved this house. That much Isabel saw at once. She had loved her brother, and she had not set foot in this hall since the fire took him, and every ruined inch of it was a wound she had come determined to blame on the wrong man. "Nathaniel," said the Dowager. Her voice was cool and clear and carried. "You look like a labourer, and you keep house like a fox. I am told you have taken to carrying young women out of the wood. I have come to see for myself what has become of my brother's son, and whether Silas is right that the county must be spared the spectacle of you." Her gaze found Isabel and moved over her. The gown, the ledger, the loose, dark hair, with an old woman's unhurried contempt. "And this, I collect, is the young person. This is Miss Isabel Hart," Nathaniel said, "and you will speak to her with courtesy, aunt, or you will speak to no one in this house at all." The Dowager's brows rose a fraction. Silas, at her side, smiled his sweet smile and drew off his gloves finger by finger. "You see, aunt," he murmured. "The temper. 5 years I have watched for it and never found it, and now a mud-spattered stranger brings it up in him in a week. It is not steadiness, whatever it looks like. A man who has kept himself locked away from all society and then flares at the first pull on his affections is precisely the man who cannot be trusted with the managing of thousands of acres and 100 souls. I say it in sorrow. I have the letters." "6 gentlemen, put your letters away, cousin," Isabel said, "and let us come to the ledger." The word went through the hall like a dropped stone through still water. Silas did not move, but something behind the pale blue eyes went very still, and Isabel, who had spent a hard spring learning to read the exact moment a smooth man's smoothness cracked, saw it crack. He recovered it in half a breath. He always would. But she had seen. "Ledger," he said pleasantly. "What ledger?" "Your uncle's steward kept the books of this estate for 30 years. Isabel came forward across the broken floor, the black volume held out flat on her 2 hands, and she laid it, she set it down, deliberately, on the good table Mrs. Hale had dragged into the light, where the Dowager and every soul in that hall could see it. "John Fenwick. My great-uncle by marriage. He found, 3 winters running, rents and timber moneys gone from these accounts, forged out in the old Duke's own signature, by a hand so fine you cannot tell it from the true, until you set them side by side, as he did, in this book, which he made with his own hands so that any fool could see the theft." She opened it to the marked page. The 2 hands lay there, the honest and the false, plain in the summer light. He carried it to the old Duke the spring before the fire. The old Duke made an appointment with his solicitor to cut the forger off entire. He never lived to keep it. The fire came first, that very week. The hall had gone utterly silent. Even the raven, on the parapet outside the broken window, held still. "Read the top line, Your Grace," Isabel said to the Dowager, and her voice did not shake. "In your brother's true hand, and beneath it the false, Michaelmas rents, the manor of Combe. £600 received, and in the false hand, 200 received, £400 gone, in 1 line, in 1 quarter, in a signature that is your brother's and is not." She stepped back. I will not tell you whose fine hand it is. You knew it before you were shown. You have had his letters your whole life." The Dowager Duchess of Ravenscar looked down at the ledger a long, long moment. And Silas, at last, stopped smiling. "An old book," he said, and his voice was still pleasant, still smooth. But there was iron coming up under it now, cold and quick. "An old book kept by an old servant who is long gone, produced by an old woman's great niece, who spent last night. Let us be plain, aunt, since we are being plain, under this very roof, in this man's house, having been carried into it in his arms. You would weigh a dead steward's scribbling, and a compromised girl's word, against 6 gentlemen of standing, and the plain fact that Nathaniel has never in 5 years said one syllable in his own defense." He turned to the Duke, and the pale eyes glittered. "Say it now then, cousin. Here is your ledger, and here is your aunt. Deny it. Tell her I fired this house. Tell her, after 5 years of silence, that black is white. And let her judge which of us the madness sits on." It was well done. Isabel felt the hall tip toward him, felt the dowager's cold grief reaching for the easier answer, the answer that did not require her to have wronged her brother's son for 5 years. Silas had found the one lever again, Nathaniel's silence, and he leaned on it with all his weight. And Nathaniel spoke. "He came that night," the Duke said. He did not raise his voice. He stood by the cold hearth with his ruined hands loose at his sides, and he spoke into the silence the words he had carried 5 years unsaid. And the hall went so quiet that the drip of water somewhere deep in the house rang like a bell. He knew my father had found him out. They quarrelled in the study, over the very papers this ledger copies. A lamp went over. I do not believe he meant the fire, aunt. I have never believed he meant the fire, but he meant the papers to be gone, and the oil ran, and the panelling took it, and he was on his horse and away, before I came down. I stood in the yard and watched him ride off with the west wing alight behind him. And then I went in for my father. Nathaniel, the dowager's cool voice, had cracked clean across. I carried him out. He was with me a little while on the grass. He told me it was Silas, and how, and he asked me, the last thing he ever asked of me, to keep it in the family. To spare the name the scandal of a Ravenscar who burned his father's house for money. He thought he was asking me to swallow a season's talk. Nathaniel's grey eyes did not leave his aunt's. He did not know he was asking me to hand Silas the estate a stone at a time. I kept his word for 5 years, aunt, at the cost of my name and yours, and everything he loved, because I could not see that the promise had turned into the knife. Miss Hart saw it. She came into my wood a week ago, against every warning in the county, and she saw in one morning what I could not see in 5 years. He drew a breath. So I am done keeping it. I loved my father. Keeping faith with him does not mean protecting the man who took him from us. It never did. I should have said so at the inquest. I am saying it now. The Dowager Duchess had gone the colour of ash. She put out one thin hand and gripped the back of a chair. And Silas moved. Isabel saw it coming, saw the smooth ruin drop clean off him, saw the pleasant mask fall and the thing beneath it show at last, white and fast and vicious, and she had the ledger snatched up off the table and hard against her chest before his hand closed on the empty air where it had lain. You conniving little, it was the first raw thing he had said in the whole of it, and it told them everything. He rounded on the dowager, and the charm was gone from his voice now, only the greed left naked in it. Aunt, you will not. You cannot credit. It is a forgery of a forgery, it is. Silas, the Dowager Duchess of Ravenscar, straightened off the chair back. She had lived 70 years being handsome and being obeyed, and she brought all of it up into her voice now, and it stopped him where he stood. You have called your uncle's steward a liar in the same breath that you reached to snatch his book off a table. A man sure of himself does not lunge. She turned her grey eyes, Nathaniel's eyes, full on him. I have known that fine hand of yours since you were a boy who forged my own name to a note for a horse you had not the money for, and I laughed, God forgive me, because it was so cleverly done. I am not laughing now. Aunt, get out of my brother's house. He did not go quietly. In the end, men like Silas never do. He stood in the burnt hall, and he threatened them, the magistrate, the letters, the 6 gentlemen. Isabel's ruined name spread the length of the county by nightfall, and Isabel stood with the ledger against her chest and watched the threats fall one by one into the great silence of the dowager's contempt and go out. For his letters were only letters, and his 6 gentlemen had signed against a silent recluse, not against a proven forger, and the moment the Dowager Duchess of Ravenscar set her name to the truth instead of the lie, the whole scaffold he had spent 5 years building came down under its own weight. He understood it. She watched him understand it. And at the last, white and shaking, robbed of the one weapon that had ever worked for him, Nathaniel's silence, he caught up his gloves and his hat and went out through the ringing hall, and the great door boomed shut behind him, and the crunch of his wheels went down the long drive toward the wood for the last time. The raven cried once from the parapet, harsh and triumphant, and flung itself out over the shining trees after him, as though to see him off the land. Into the quiet that followed, the Dowager Duchess sat down very suddenly in the good chair, as though her upright old body had used the last of itself, and put one thin hand over her mouth, and for a moment the ruthless architecture of her face came all apart. Isabel, without a word, drew back. This was not hers to witness. She went to the foot of the scorched stair, and there, drawn by she could not have said what, she looked up at the portrait at the turn, the young grey-eyed woman with her armful of Holland lilies and her wide, clever mouth, and at the small table beneath it, where the child's wooden horse lay under its fall of grey dust, its paint worn to the grain, set down and never moved. She heard, behind her, the dowager rise, heard the old woman's slow step cross the broken floor, and she turned to find the Dowager Duchess standing at her shoulder, looking not at the portrait, but at the worn wooden horse, and the old face had gone soft and terrible, with a grief 5 years buried. "My brother carved that," the dowager said, very low, to no one, her fingers not quite touching it. "For Nathaniel. Before any of the trouble, before any of us knew what we would come to." She stood a moment longer, and then she took her hand back, and folded it into the other, and turned, and Isabel stepped quietly away, and left her the length of the hall to gather up what an old woman gathers before she can do a hard thing. When the dowager came to Nathaniel, she came the whole way across the burnt hall to stand before him, small and grey and upright, and Isabel saw what it cost her to do it, and did not look away. "I stood in this hall 5 years ago," the dowager said, "and I asked you to swear to me that you had done everything a son could do, and you would not swear it. And I took your silence for guilt, and I have spoken of you since as one speaks of a thing best not named. And I told this county with my own mouth and my own consequence that my brother's son was not to be trusted." Her voice was steady only by main force. "You would not swear it, Nathaniel, because you could not, because you had carried him out on your own back and given him your word on the grass and were keeping it against your own life. And I looked at the honestest man in this family and called him a monster, because a monster was easier to bear than the truth of how I had lost my brother." She reached into her reticule and drew out the folded, sealed petition, Silas's memorial, the 6 signatures, the whole engine of 5 years' patience, and she set it down on the good table, and put her thin old hand flat upon it, and pushed it across the wood toward him. "There, it is yours to burn. I withdraw my name from it, and I will write to every gentleman on it in my own hand, and withdraw more than my name, I will write them the truth, and let it cost my consequence what it will. I have spent enough of it wrongly. I find I would rather spend the last of it on you." Her mouth worked. "I am sorry. It is a small word for 5 years. It is the one I have." Nathaniel looked at the petition under her hand. Then he took it up, and he did not read it, he had lived it. And he turned and laid it in the low fire on the hearth, and they all watched Silas's 5 years of patient malice curl and blacken, and go up the burnt chimney of the house it had failed to take. "Aunt Augusta," Nathaniel said, and his voice was rough. He took her thin hands in his ruined ones. "You lost your brother. I lost my father. We were both of us grieving in the dark and reaching for the nearest thing to hold to blame. I do not want your consequence spent on me. I want—" He stopped, and something eased in the hard face that Isabel had never yet seen ease all the way. "I want you to come to dinner. Mrs. Hale has a soup of the garden's own leeks that would reconcile warring nations. And I should like, very much, for you to meet properly the woman who followed a raven into my wood and would not, under any persuasion, leave it." The Dowager Duchess turned her grey eyes on Isabel. They were wet and unashamed of it, and there was the ghost of something in them now that might, in time, become a smile. "A raven," she said. "How very like this family, to be saved by the one bird the whole county takes for an omen of ruin." She freed one hand and held it out to Isabel, imperious and shaking. "Come here, child, and let me look at you. If you mean to stay, and I see quite plainly that you do, then you had best get used to being looked at by an old woman with opinions. I have a great many, and I have just been proved wrong in the largest of them, which will make me insufferable about the rest for some time." Isabel came, and took the offered hand, and dropped the old woman a curtsy with her ruined ankle, and her amber muslin, and her ink-stained fingers, and the Dowager Duchess of Ravenscar looked at her a long moment and then, astonishingly, laughed. A cracked, rusty, unpracticed sound, the exact twin of her nephew's. "Yes," she said. "You will do very well. You will do very well indeed." They were married in the little grey church at Witchcombe in the last warm week of August, quietly, in the morning, with Prudence Fenwick in the front pew, in her enormous straw bonnet weeping without the least shame, and Mrs. Hale weeping worse and pretending it was the pollen. The Dowager Duchess came, in dove-grey silk, and sat very upright, and told everyone within reach that she had known from the first how it would go, which was a thorough falsehood, and delighted her enormously. The county came too, because a Dowager Duchess in the front pew is a thing no county can resist, and because the truth of the fire had gone up and down the valley all summer on 100 morning calls, and Witchcombe, which had crossed itself against the wood for 5 years, discovered it had always known the Duke was more sinned against than sinning, and said so, at length, to anyone who would listen. Silas Ravenscar's name was not spoken. He had gone abroad, they said, for his health. He did not come back. Isabel drew the wedding in her book that evening, the church porch, the limes, Prudence's bonnet, because it was the first thing in a year she had wanted to keep. Autumn came into the valley and turned the great overgrown lawn to gold, and the wood to fire, and the men Nathaniel hired began, plank by plank and stone by stone, to bring the west wing back up out of its ruin, not to hide what had happened there, he said, but so that a house that had survived it should not have to go on looking like a wound. Mrs. Hale got her scullery back. Tom got a garden that no longer had to feed only 3, and the lime avenue his mother had brought from Holland the year he was born was cut back and let breathe, and in the mornings now Isabel took her sketchbook and her pencil down it in the low gold light, and drew the sundial with its face worn blank, and the stone urn, and the raven, who had appointed himself to the whole business, and sat on her shoulder, or the sundial, or the Duke's broad head with the air of a creature who considered the entire arrangement his own personal accomplishment. Which, they had both long since agreed, it was. "He wants feeding," Nathaniel said, coming down the avenue toward her through the drifting leaves with 2 cups in his big scarred hands, and the old wooden horse mended and set on the mantel indoors where the light could reach it. "He has been sitting on my correspondence all morning looking martyred. I begin to think he arranged the whole of my life for his own convenience, and merely lets me imagine I have the running of it." "He did arrange the whole of your life." Isabel took the cup, Their fingers met around it, and neither hurried to part them. He arranged mine too. I was on my knees among the foxgloves drawing flowers, because it was the one thing that cost nobody anything, and he came to the gate and looked at me as though I were expected somewhere. As though I were wanted. She looked up at him, at the hard, beautiful face gone soft in the morning, the scar, the grey eyes, the wide, clever mouth that was his mother's, and hers now too. I had forgotten what it was, to be wanted. He remembered it for me. "I want you," Nathaniel said, plainly, the way he said everything. And it was the first time, and not the last, and it landed in the gold morning like a stone dropped into still, clear water. "I have wanted you since you told me my milk had been frightened by being wanted. I have loved you since you stood in my ruined parlor, with your ankle turned under you, and told me you had nothing left worth keeping, if the price of keeping it was me. I did not think I had any of it left in me to feel. Isabel, you went into the burnt part of the house, and found it, and carried it out. As no one was ever able to do for me, but you." She set down the cup on the blank sundial. She put her ink-stained hands up to his face. And she kissed the cursed Duke of Ravenscar in the avenue of Holland limes, with the leaves coming down gold around them, and the raven cawing his enormous satisfaction from the mended parapet, and neither of them was cursed at all any longer, and both of them knew it. "Careful," she murmured against his mouth. "The raven is watching, and I am told he talks." "Let him," said Nathaniel, and gathered her in, and held her the way he had held her in the storm, as though she weighed no more than a sketchbook, as though she were the one thing in 5 years worth carrying home. "He has been trying to tell the whole county the truth about me since the day of the fire. I find I no longer mind if he does. Above them, on the parapet of the house the whole world had once agreed to forsake, the black raven spread its wings against the gold October sky, its beak open in the same silent, knowing cry as the raven carved in stone above the door, and looked down on the two of them there among the limes, entirely, at last, at home. And that is where we will leave them, in the gold of the turning year, in the house come back to life, with the wood no longer a thing to be crossed against, but a thing to be walked through hand in hand. If Isabel and her cursed duke and their meddling matchmaking raven warmed you tonight, do stay a while longer by the fire with me. Give this story a gentle like so another lonely soul might find their way down the path. Leave me a word below telling me whether you'd have followed that raven into the wood, and subscribe to keep the lantern lit for the next tale. Sleep well, dear listener. The fire will be burning here again soon, and there is always a place kept for you.